this is where we're at in the poster so far. We have both figures in their place, the correct size. Now we're going to start thinking about how we build in the full scene of the movie poster around them. Sometimes I like to have the movie poster be up on the top layer, and I can work with a higher or lower opacity based on what I want to see. So you got to start by deciding what kind of images you need to find. So I think the first thing that I'm going to do is try to find the cloud background, and then from there probably some buildings and some lightning bolts, and then we'll start building some things. So to do an image search, go to Google, click on images, start searching for something. In this case, I'm going to put in some dark clouds and change your size to large. You just want to work with higher resolution images. When you hover over your image, you can see how many pixels are part of it. So those with a higher pixel count will be better to work with. So after you find a picture, drag it onto your desktop, and then from there, drag it into Photoshop. Resize it using the transform tool. And once you're happy with how that looks, hit enter. Next part I'm going to find here is some of the buildings. So I'll just fast forward through that. It's the same process that we just went through, image search and find it. In this case, what I ended up needing to do is just layer mask out this sky, so that it would just be the clouds right behind. Then what we're going to do is work with editing to change the coloration. So I need to raster size a layer before I can go in and do individual edits. You'd find that through the image adjustments menu. Probably would end up doing something like reduce the saturation for this one to make it look like a little less colorful. And then from there I'm going to work with levels. So you could find that in the adjustment menu as well. I'm working with the sky here and with the buildings simultaneously to make them look like they match. So as you raster size, that just changes it from a smart object into pixels again. Again, same kind of thing. I'm reducing the saturation and adjusting the coloration to try to make it have the same vibe as the poster. You might end up using some of the other edits as you're doing this as well to make it match even more the way that you'd like it to. Next, I'm going to do some work with finding some of the lightning bolts. Now, one of the tricks that I have for you is that if you ever find something that's on a black background, you can easily use something called a screen mode in Photoshop to quickly just have it be by itself. So I found some lightning that I thought was nice. It has a black background. I was going to find a couple different types to work with, so that way it's not all the same. And I'll bring these in to Photoshop and end up having a real easy time just cutting out the background by putting into a screen mode. So here I brought in the lightning, resized it, just hit enter when you're happy with the size, change that mode from normal for its blending mode to screen, and voila, you have it's maybe sometimes a little bit see-through, but a pretty good cutout of whatever it was that was on the black background. So I'm going to duplicate some of these, bring it in a couple different times, and have it fill the space behind to really give it an electric lightning look. So the next thing I'm doing is I'm creating this beam that's behind our figures. I created a new layer and used the rectangular marquee tool to make a selection that was just a rectangle, the same size as the movie poster. I filled that with a color from the poster, which was the lighter blue, almost white. Then I'm going to deselect and then do a blur to the edges to make it look like it has a bit of a blur, kind of like what you have in the movie poster. So the Gaussian blur is a nice effect because it changes the edges to make them look a little bit more like the blur from the movie poster. You can resize things as you need to from here. And then I'm going to start fast forwarding here a little bit because I'm actually going to create another one of these that has a slightly different color, more of a blue. Alright, now I'm going to move towards making the smaller lines that kind of flare out along the edge. So plan out where they're going to be, and then in this case all I did was just create a line, and then I had a stroke filled with the color that I wanted, and now I'm using what's called a motion blur, so that's in the filter menu right by Gaussian blur, to make it look like it spreads out a little bit. And after I was happy with how that looked, I was able to just copy and paste that same thing a few times and recreate that in other parts of the poster to get the effect. So now I'm going to start creating the platform that the people are standing on. I'm going to start by looking at the original poster, and then I'm going to use something called a polygonal lasso tool here. Click on that, and then I'm going to trace around the platform. And here I'm going to add on that circular part a little bit later. So I'm just tracing around the straight edges with the polygonal lasso tool. You have to complete a full shape with the polygonal lasso tool to make the selection. So that's why I'm going across here. And then once you see the dotted lines, you know that you've made your whole shape. So then I'm going to make the circle using what's called an elliptical marquee tool. If you hold shift, you can add to your selection. Then we're just going to drag a circle right along to create the platform. I'm thinking about perspective here. Okay, so then next I'm going to fill this with a color. And the color is going to be a gradation. I'll start by selecting the foreground color. So I use the color picker, and I click in the light area, click OK, then I'll click on the background color, and I'll click in the dark area. And after I've done that, I click OK again. Then I'm going to make sure that I've got a brand new layer that I'm going to use the gradation on. So in the layers palette, you'll want to make sure you create a brand new layer first before you do this. As I was starting to work on this one, I decided, no, I'd rather have it be a little bit darker. So I went in and used the gradation tool again, but I decided to change it so that it would be a little bit darker earlier in my gradation. So in order to do that, you're going to click on the gradient tool area in the upper left hand corner of your screen, and you can push a color to a certain area, and then you can create a new one. So the last color here, I'm just going to make pure black. So now it goes from that teal to a little bit darker teal all the way to black. So it's a lot darker. And you can keep, as long as you've got your selection and you've got your layer that you're working on, you can keep changing your gradation just by trying it again. Pull that line a different direction and see what it looks like. Alright, so now it's time to make this look more 3D. So I'm going to make this platform have a duplicate layer, and then I'm going to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional by painting the area between. So here I am making a duplicate layer. I'm going to select that bottom layer. I'm going to move it down just a little bit. So I went to the move tool and I arrow keyed it down just a little bit. And then I'm going to use that same layer and I'm going to paint between to make it look like it's all connected. So again, I've got this layer selected. I could add in a color overlay to make it a little bit darker than the rest, or I could even use levels to darken that in. So here's me just using levels, darken it so it looks like it's the value of the side. After I'm happy with how that looks, I click OK, and then I'm going to paint the area between. So I just go to the brush tool, I select the color of the platform below, I'm going to make sure that I'm at 100% hardness and a really small brush, and I just paint between. do the same on all the edges that you can see the three-dimensional part. So now I'm going to create a shadow underneath our figures. So I create a brand new layer, pull that up underneath our figures. I'm going to use the brush tool, but a really soft brush tool that's a little bit larger. I'm going to paint that in right below the feet. So I get 0% hardness, a little bit larger brush, and now I just start to paint in where I think the shadow should be. Then on the actual layer, I can change the opacity down a little bit lower so that it's kind of see-through and I can see my platform below. So just work with the opacity to decide what you think looks best. To make the platform a little bit more believable, I'm just going to start to find a texture that I think would work well to go over it. So I'm going to take this Death Star Trench texture picture, bring that onto the desktop here, and then pull it into Photoshop. And then I'm going to transform it to make it so that it looks like it's the same perspective. So I'm going to work with perspective here. Make the top edge look like it's a lot smaller. Bring the bottom edge out so it looks like it's a lot wider to make the lines look like they match up with the platform. See that I really push this in a big way. Then I'll drag it into its spot. Now this is going to cover over some of the color of this graphic layer that I built. But I'm going to make it an overlay so that way you can still see through it and have the color affect what's above it. So after you're happy with how that looks, hit enter, then right click on the layer and create a clipping mask. So that only affects the layer that's right below. And then I change that blending mode to overlay, and you'll see the results are quite nice.